What I was saying is I need the energy so I come in here, I was like, I don't want to talk. I need to be like, guys, all right, welcome back to another episode. MCD1 Mondays. We're here to update Vivian. We're going to check it out. Dave Watts is here. You motherfucker. Got him. So here's another update on Vivian. I think we talked last time. I was thinking about the stuff we didn't get done, that we said we were gonna have done, because the order of progress on here, there is progress, but I wouldn't say that it's keeping to a consistent schedule of what we talk about. So most stuff that I say is getting done gets done, but we jump around on what makes sense. So I know the fuel tank was going to be done. It's not done, it needs welding and fittings and things. I see you looking, and I see you doing that stuff over there. Also, guys who weld together, stay together. You know what I'm saying? And then the exhaust. So those are like the two items that we talked about getting done. They're not done yet, but there's a lot more stuff done. So we'll check that. Okay. We'll probably look at this from both sides just because there's a lot of sheet metal in here. Tin work was the thing we talked about with this thing. We wanted to build out the chassis, and then we wanted to avoid the traditional, cold rolled 18 or 16 gauge sheet metal, silicone bronze, bead rolls everywhere kind of thing. Try to have this like a hybrid construction pre-runner. That's kind of what I've coined this as, just based off of your typical like luxury pre-runner or sealed cab pre-runner would be all welded silicone bronze panels with like access panels inside of those. And we really wanted to have this more like a race application, but not so race where it's all just a tin can and it's all really thin panel work. So what we have here is kind of the front firewall floorboard for passenger and driver. The floors are 1/8 inch or 125, and then the front firewall that might take like rock splash or any kind of like debris or terrain is 90, and then we have like 063, which is your typical stuff for the exterior, like the enclosure panels and everything like that. Everything is the same kind of construction we talked about. Floating nut plates on tabs, prefabbed, and then rivet construction to tie all that together. Obviously there's like tight spacing just like on an aircraft. This stuff is 1 inch on center. And we'll just be using Clecos throughout until we powder everything. Once everything gets powder coated, then we'll go back in and final all the rivet areas. But there's a lot of modular thought into this thing. I can kind of start taking some of it apart for you guys to see. We wanted to figure out like what needs to be serviced in what order, and that's how these panels come out. Some things to think about with this stuff. What we're gonna do right now is I'm processing this for you guys as well, but thinking about with what we need to do constructing all the firewall and floor, is think about what stuff needs to be serviced and what panels need to come off of where, how to interlock them, and like index and have overlap for seal, and prioritize those things in order of where we need to get to. Like obviously your classic one that you always see with off-road cars or things with the engines scooted back is the side panels, like the access panels where the trans and the engine would be. So that's one that will come off by itself, that's kind of got like these lower panels. Can't really hear. So you can see on this side, obviously this one's got some forming in it for the gas pedal, but this whole piece would want to come off, and that would be modular. And then the same with this side over here. So we have those. What else? This thing's going to come off. And obviously nothing's like polished and fluffed and buffed here. Everything is just kind of chunked in. But you can see like right there, you got some pretty good access. What we'll do is we'll take the coil packs that are already set up for remote, and we'll float these on bracketry where they're in here, but they're not attached to the panel. Like the typical thing you might want to do is just flip these guys and then bolt them to the back side of that panel. But then if you need to service this and then you undo this panel, then what's going to happen? And you're like doing janky shit. So better thing to do is just tab it here, pull that thing off, have serviceability. Those brackets are really easy to take those off if they need to just be removed altogether, and then you can still get to the engine. Before we go over here, let's just touch on what we got going on the driver's side for the controls. Neat stuff, slick stuff, raw stuff. Okay, things to look at here. Obviously everything gets tight no matter what, just based on where the engine is. So even if we didn't have tube and anything there, you're still gonna be kind of in a compromised position where your foot controls are and your gas pedal. So kind of dug into this thing as best we could. Still pretty tight back there. But it's enough to get the job done. And then obviously Colin's been working on this thing, and it's clearance specifically for our gas pedal. So that's one item there. The front firewall stuff is gonna live in here. And then we had to negotiate our brake pedal. Same kind of thing, things just got tight. We sat in here, kind of centered things the best we could. And then instead of, like sometimes with these big longer pedals, this is a manual brake system, so leverage is key with this stuff. Versus having like a power brake where you don't need as much leverage to get the job done. But with this, instead of doing like a chicane where you kind of traverse this structure over and down, just cut the pedal off, the actual pad, and then scooched it over, and that got us exactly where we needed to be. Now as far as like the masters being mounted up there, we've got structure tied into the chassis now, where this is all chrome moly plate. Right where the masters bolt, left the brake reservoirs in their traditional spot that they were already in. And you can kind of see everything's just built, you know, the style we do things, on tangent as best we can. Returns for the tin work, and then returns back onto here. And this is very similar to the other side of the car. Obviously the foot box is just extending out towards the front more than the passenger side. Can see with the passenger side, like this is the side that I started first. Obviously got a jump. I did the way we've kind of done some of the stuff on this thing is I'll do some of it and I'll get like a jump start going for Colin, and then he has kind of a reference to start going on. But with this, we did the passenger footwell didn't need to be extended out because I'd much rather have breathing going to the header and kind of feeding into that tunnel so it's not getting heat soaked back there. And we tried to do that the same on the driver's side, where instead of just doing what your body wants to do and going fill area, boom, try to open some of that so there's actual space and air traveling through there. With the like the exterior trim panels on the front of this thing, what we'll do is have, you know, another panel kind of floating here where it doesn't even need to follow the tangent of the structure here. It can just kind of come in and float and go out and, you know, cover as much ground as it can without having multiple pieces. And then we'll put ventilation in there, so it'll be kind of a cool thing to look through too. You can probably add like a nice little cyclone in there, and then when the car has all the rock lights and stuff on, you'll see like all the engine and the components in there through the mesh of the exterior panels. So that sounds like they're stripped. They're not. The nut plates like this, they're floating nut plates. That's why they kind of have that noise, because there's actually some room for movement in there. And the threads, like it's almost like a stover or like an oval top, like they quench on the top. So there's always going to be a little resistance, but these things are like hardened. I don't know how they're treated or what's going on, but I mean, they'll mess up a bolt way before they will mess themselves up. And that's another benefit of those things, like versus using you know, a threaded insert or a nutsert, because you'll always just spin the nutsers, or you'll blow those things out, and then you're going to drill them out, and it's a chore. So definitely worth the investment on those things. And obviously, like the floating portion, they make them either way, but this is just as great of an investment to get those. So kind of see what we got here. 1, 2, 3 come out, and then it's full service. The front of this thing, same, like I can get all the header bolts, I can get to all the plugs, valve covers, everything comes out, everything is serviceable, trans bolts, everything's just, this motor is not that far back in retrospect, you know, or comparison to like a luxury Prerunner tube chassis car where they're buried. So that stuff works out. I can show you the trans tunnel. Just kind of wanted to have all the panels in first, and then we can start dissecting some things. Yeah, we'll do that and then talk about the seats. So on here, we talked about originally having a seat slider for driver side. Eric's a smaller fella. Keith, who's been like doing the shock tuning on this thing, is a taller fella. I'm a medium fella. So needed a couple variants of sizing for adjustments on the seats. And then we talked about having them go up and down, not just you know, front to rear, but up and down. So what we have here is there's a structure, like the other thing too is like wanted to have the floors be like simple, where there wasn't like a bunch of brackets and gnarly breakup of the actual floor material and surfacing. Like we wanted to just have something where almost the seats were like floating, but not. So I have an example here. Obviously Colin's been slaying away on this stuff. I have an example of the seat in here with the sliders mounted to the brackets and like on the pedestal, and then we also just have the you know, the structure itself without any of the slider or seat on it, just as a proof of concept. The one thing is you can see that, like, actually I'll get into it with the small camera so you guys can see the details. We were able to get front and rear adjustment, and then what we have is like a sliding sleeve thing for you know, Eric, if he needs to go higher. It's kind of set in the low position, and then if he wants to not only go forward but go up, then we have like a way to bring this thing up 1.5 inches. And I don't know if we'll even end up using that, but at least that's a viable option. Or if he sets it in that position, then I can at least know that if I get in this thing to drive it, I can sit here and whack this thing off to where it needs to go. Just wanted to kind of get a good reference point on here. So if you just think about, like, the brake's not gonna come up right now, it's not hooked up, but you can kind of see where I'm at foot-wise. Please don't mind the strings that are coming out of my shorts, just look at this stuff here. There's not a lot of scoot over, like if you see the middle of the seat here, you know, we're not terribly out of line here. Sometimes I've been in cars, or I've looked at cars where like your feet are way over here, and we're in a pretty good spot here. It doesn't feel terribly uncomfortable. The other thing that we're gonna wanna incorporate is gonna be a dead pedal here, which essentially is just gonna be like a brace for your left foot. When you're not, you know, there's a lot of stuff where you're going through chop, braking sections, or anything where you kind of want to brace, or when you're gonna know there's impact coming through. So just having a dead pedal in these things is extremely beneficial. So we'll have that set up here, and then if you see the reference of like where you'd want that dead pedal to be on that tube, then you can kind of see the idea of where that wall is for the passenger side firewall. So we have that, and then, you know, we already sat in there, and then we'll just have an angled dead pedal that goes all the way across, possible storage inside of it, but definitely like some kind of structure with just angle there to grab. The other thing to think about too, when the third seat is in here, your feet really want to kind of be right in this area. And next episode we'll have that third seat in here, and you can kind of see where the kicker is, but we'll probably need some kind of a foundation where instead of, you know, putting your feet way up here in spooky areas, or down here in like an uncomfortable area, we'll maybe have to have like something that bolts on that's more rectangular, where you can grasp, you know, your right foot and left foot here in a way that makes sense. But the angle of this thing is premium. Like you know, I think that's pretty common in a lot of the 3-seat trucks, is like that third seat is your best seat in the house there. It's kind of, it feels the safest. You have tons of structure and you're just right in the middle. It's usually a little higher so you can see, and your feet, as long as it's not like in a small size truck, your feet are in a really good spot. I always kind of have a thing where you don't want to be sitting, you know, if that was your third seat, you don't want to have your legs like completely flat, because when you hit a G out or some kind of gnarly compression, and you don't have any kind of kick like in your hips or in your knees, and no way to brace your feet, and you're kind of just having floppy legs sitting out there like you're sitting on the cement or something, the compression that would go into like your back and your spine just with my bro science would be really detrimental, and I think you'll get yourself hurt a lot easier like that. So having some kind of brace and like some kind of you know, pivot kinks there make more sense. So you can kind of see here, this is just the example on the driver's side. There is these tubes, and what we'll do is I think we got some footage of them without this stuff on, without the floors on, but these tubes are sleeved. So you have 1-inch tube that's your male, that's going into the female, that's actually hard mounted into the chassis, and then there's adjustment holes just on the driver's side where there's adjustment. The passenger side is fixed, so they're just through bolts that'll capture the actual structure into the chassis, and those will live there. But this one we're probably going to put on pins. We thought about putting an actuator into the middle of the seat to kind of help the thing go up and down, because, you know, if this is a closed like cab door slammer style thing, picking the seat up and down manually is going to be a 2-person effort, and I think we'll be in a better spot to just have the thing on an actuator right into that X. I can kind of show you on the other side. So this is a pretty rigid structure. I mean, obviously everything's chromoly, but if we tab here and we're on a slide system, which everything is square, no matter what, it's still gonna be tight, because you're welding, you know, a bunch of stuff to the chassis. You're welding this whole system on the table, and we've got it as best we can, but I think having an actuator tabbed right into the X and then going vertical, being mounted vertical. So you can kind of see, like, this is your one of your seat mounts, one of the female portions, and then you can also see over here off the side of the rocker, there's 2 more, right? So those are the outside, that's the outside front and the outside rear there, and those were a pretty easy stab, just because, you know, Colin notched right into the main outer, like the rocker tube here, full weld all around. But that's your sleeve area, right? So the male just kind of does this thing. You can't really fit 2 fingers in there, but you get 1. So that's your 1-inch tube, and that's the same way. It's consistent for both driver and passenger, and you can kind of see the tube sticking out of that one. So that's your that's going to be your mechanism to go through there. But you can kind of start to see everything's pretty good under here as far as the sheet metal, and closing areas off and areas that make sense. You can see all the floor, like the floor is still kind of following true to whatever's under there. So like the output shaft on the trans here and the drive shaft is favoring the shape here for the center tunnel there. And then the floors kind of do the same thing. The low spot here is pretty nice. You can at least collect cell phones or you know, keys or change in the bottom there. I don't know if we want to put something for sand, just to kind of have, that's going to be a central location for the lowest spot in the car. But again, the layers here with prioritizing what panels need to come on and off, it's always something to think about, especially if you're doing panel work where it's all modular, because that will mean that you have returns that are kind of grabbing other panels where they want to land. So a lot of that forethought has to be done here. I can kind of take this off to show you guys if we need to, but this is still 90. And that's still kind of our protective barrier, just like this stuff. And then we'll have 063 on the outside, which we'll talk about. But here, same kind of thing, needed to negotiate covers in here. We know that the exhaust is here, so that was one of the other things on my notepad that I wrote down is I wanted to put 2 layers of tin work where the exhaust is going to be running, and we know it's going to run very similar to what's going on with the C pillar to B pillar tube here. It's going to kind of run up through here, so we have an outer panel and an inner panel, and then we can put the proper stuff on the back side of those to kind of dissipate some of the heat. The shocks themselves, just a nice big service panel here. You know, you could take that whole thing off, but I think it's more beneficial if we just have something where you can isolate just servicing the shocks, getting in there to work. We still haven't tapped into this one. This will probably be something similar to where we want to be able to take it off. But the whole, like this whole car will come apart and it'll just be tabs. There's not, like the only thing that lives in here is just the dash trim, like sheet metal here, which the dash is part of the car. So it just made sense to have that be sealed and be there. We can kind of talk about that trough, I guess, or the storage trough there. I'll get back there and get into more details. So you can see we need panels done. This guy, this lower floor panel, and the side panel for the driver's side need to be done still. I've just been kind of moving through this side. Obviously, you got some of the driver's side done on the rear of the chassis. But you know, the templates, what's really satisfying is these templates are very, very close to the other side. So you can really just, you know, there's brakes that you put in the chipboard, but you can just kind of flip those brakes and flip the whole thing over, and that stuff will fit each way. And it makes your life easier. And it also gives you a little bit of verification that you're building stuff square and straight and symmetrical per side. So what I wanted to get at here is just, this might look kind of interesting as far as like your back wall is typically a vertical thing here that, you know, someone might want to build vertical. But what happens is with these seats, there's a void, like, and if you can see this angle, right, that's a pretty heavy angle. And, you know, give or take, that seat is never really completely vertical. It's not like bonered out like a ejector seat in a jet or something. So, you know, with this, there's a void. And I just kind of have this straight edge here just to kind of show you guys like where we're at with that angle. But this is built to spec for the third seat. So when the third seat goes in here, it's not going to have a slider. I don't know if we mentioned, but we're also going to put a slider on the passenger seat just because it makes more sense to make all the structures symmetrical. But for the third seat, we have about 1 inch or 1.25 inches on the draft angle here. So this is built to like the back side of the seat where you're maximizing your storage, because when you have that void and you build this vertical wall, unless you're trying to run like a trunk unit, AC unit or something back here, you know, you have that vertical wall and there's no way you're getting in there. You don't have 4 doors in this thing. It's an extra cab with 2 doors. So to try to use that to compartmentalize, really had to buffer myself through that one. To really compartmentalize this thing, it doesn't make sense to try to make storage back there. So what made the most sense is bring the rear storage compartment back in towards the seat as much as possible, because it's going to be a lot easier to get stuff from the back openings of the chassis and through behind, like almost like it was a pickup bed, and stuff this thing full with whatever we need, and then we're occupying all the space. You know, with this thing, the more stuff we build into this car, the tighter things get and the more valuable the real estate and the footprint of stuff is in here. So we'll have a, you know, this is obviously the return that we're talking about, where we'll have, you know, Zeus buttons here. And then this thing's gonna kind of come out. This is long, that's why it's kind of just chilling. And I left some overhang here, so it'll follow, and we'll have an angle here, and then it'll break over, follow right all the way across, and then it's gonna do the same thing over on the driver's side. We'll probably just put some bead rolling in there just for rigidity and style points. And you know, that will be something that can come off too. So I don't know if you guys can see back there. Can you get back in any of that? Okay. So that area, like we have our oil cooler and our trans cooler that we mounted, and that's kind of like the predetermined positions for them. Also pulling air from this interior portion and blowing that on the shocks and blowing it on the exhaust. So there's just movement. Like we talked about with the trans tunnel, There's heat soaking that goes on in these things, where if the air is just stale and it doesn't move, things just get hot, and it kind of accelerates their fail rate or their fade for the shocks. You know, just temperatures, just hot temperatures in vehicles just doesn't work, period. I don't know if there's a beneficial thing for that at any point in a vehicle. So what we got there is the coolers are kind of the determining factor for like the space and the packaging back here. Something streamlined, pull stuff in and out. Again, this is 90, so it's thick, so if you drop something on that, it's not just gonna dent. I would almost be tempted to kind of hit that right now, but I could shit the bed, so I'm not gonna do that. And then, you know, this portion, getting this thing in and out, that's pretty much why there's the middle portion missing, because I started to build it all as one piece, and then I'd have to kind of taco fold the aluminum through this portion, this opening, to get it out. And Colin got after me. He goes, well, why don't you make it like two pieces, like with a seam down the middle, and put them in? And then I took that and rode that out to get this. So this isn't really a service panel. It's just a connecting panel that we have in here. And then we'll talk about what's going on back there too. Cool. All right, so we are up in a different position here. There's some really good opportunities to get a perspective on symmetry and things working. Don't worry about my stance, it's normal. I usually go to 90, so. But even starting with the fuel tank, with the pickup, and just the lines, the hold downs, our coffin fill plate, everything, the parallels are kind of working out well here. And then, you know, traveling from there to the upper links, you know, everything, like there's some really nice, satisfying things here. Now that's not really by design, that's just by functionality. Where do things need to go? How do things need to land? And then pulling from them the best we can to make sense of that. What we have here is the storage trough. So obviously the everything after the bump stop is just gonna be fuel capacity. And then our kind of thing we have to package and place everything in is the storage trough here, which is pretty much your half pickup bed, if you will. You can see the ventilation in these panels. This is specific for air circulation. So the cooler that's mounted driver and passenger here, they can pull in from here, and they can also pull in from the top, and it just kind of breaks up. Again, you know, it's better to have more air than less. So, you know, you get some venting from the top, and you get some intake from the sides. Now, the other thing to look at is just where our space is here. You know, if you kind of look at these lines here, that's where that panel, it's gonna break. It's starting from over here, you know, that interior behind the third seat we talked about. That panel is gonna go right here. So it's not gonna be in line. It's gonna go in further into the car. We have a speed toolkit that needs to go in here. We're gonna have a soft cooler that should have a 12 volt, like a refrigeration cooling accessory that it can plug into the car. I like the soft coolers a lot more with these things, just because I always notice the vehicles, they beat the crap out of cans of Dr. Pepper or Coca-Cola in there, and it's better just, the soft cooler takes care of your beverages a lot better. So we'll do speed toolkit, soft cooler, obviously some recovery stuff in here, and whatever miscellaneous stuff. And then if you needed to, you could always strap soft goods in. You can stuff, if you had like a go bag for the occupants in there, you can always fit those on the sides of the third seat. The other void here, let me see, there we go. So the other void here that we left open is going to be for batteries. We'll be able to fit 2 batteries here and possibly a jack in this whole area. This stuff's just roughed out. You can see, like, it, you know, some of it's got Tommy two-tone on it, and then some of it's just raw dog. So once we get all of the tin work, we will make this thing all fluff and buff style. This shape here is kind of just the predetermined layout that simplifies things. This is all thicker, so if you drop something on here, going in and out, or if you need to step, like if you need to stand on the panel, you know, you can stand on the panel, you're okay. And it's not going to do anything because this is going to be kind of your entranceway into the storage here. So got some pretty good style points back here, and it really trickles into the rest of the car. Everything just sides. Look at those specimens. My gosh, holy moly, dude. All this stuff trickles in really nice. So kind of covering that, I'd like to definitely have a lot of this tin work finalized for next update, especially on the rear portion of the car. And we have to get the inside done because we're gonna put the cab on, and once the cab's on and we start fixing stuff, it's gonna go kind of, it's gonna cross thread our program if we have to do interior appointments with the cab living on there. So what Dave was mentioning is same sentiment about the coolers and how they kind of destroy beverages. Womp, womp, womp. But you know, just figuring out a solution where you're not getting that stuff compromised, and that's a hybrid cooler that would fit back here, so we'll probably really explore that.
The bonus to those is as you take your beverages out, you can continue to cinch it down, and it just keeps everything.
Yeah, that's bomb. So talking about the exterior panels or the enclosure panels in the rear chassis, same deal here. This is what I talked about with the 2 layers. So this is kind of you got your internal layer here. There you go, internal layer. I don't know if I can say that. You have your internal layer here. And then again, exhaust is gonna come right through that guy and go here, break right before the bolt for the pivot, and then come right on up. And that's where a lot of heat's going to be trickling down, especially if stuff's blowing this way. It makes sense to try to get some of that suppressed before hitting the internal panel. So this is your exterior. It also just cleans things up here, especially if we're going to run in truggy form. The kind of shapes are really good because they trickle. It's almost like the shock mount starts, and it's tight up here, and it kind of spreads into the bypass and the coilover, and then it ties into this whole bulkhead here of tubes, and then this part almost flows the same way, all in unison. Another thing to note too, so obviously you can see kind of where this stuff dives in, and then there's also a stepped return here for another panel. The Zeus button location here, you gotta imagine the cab's gonna go on here. Once the cab goes on, there's a little bit of a reveal of the shock mount, so that's kind of just a good reference. And then that guy's gonna come down. And this, you know, the Zeus button here, that location is a little deeper towards the rear of the chassis, not towards the front, because, you know, the windowsill and everything will be there, so we wanna still be able to access the Zeus button. Same with like this spread, right? I always kind of hold a Zeus tool and make sure that you can get in instead of stabbing them so far in the corner that sometimes you can't get to them. But I've done that too, so don't worry, I'll check all the boxes. And then this area is gonna have a panel too. So once we get the cab on, then we can add that secondary enclosure panel to the top portion here. Maybe leave it just so we can get to the, you know, the nitrogen here, but you know, since it's almost at the point where I bet we can cover it, because then you just pop that and then you can get to the rebound tubes and everything too. So that's one thing to think about. You can see right now what's in process is going to be the next 2 panels, which would be like the rear chassis enclosure panels. 1 panel, 2 panel, very simple in the back. Just figuring out there is some stuff on this chassis. We didn't build the rear portion, or, you know, even some of the lower portions here. We just kind of tie it into that zone. So with that being said, like there's some plane changes. Usually when you're building a chassis and you know that it's going to get a tin package, or a sheet metal package, you want to start thinking about how to land the tubes in a way that will help you and support putting panel work on. And this thing has a couple different plane changes that make for forward thinking. Not a huge deal. It just is gonna, like, the design will be dictated by the tube layout and the chassis layout and the constraints that are already here. So, you know, the thing that we kind of got going on here is this is our outer trim. It obviously holsters or saddles the tubes, kind of keeps clean through here. It goes on the bottom tube, obviously goes to the intersection there. And goes up, and then what it does is it drags out and floats here, just to kind of pull into the shock mounts, and that's where our coilover can swing and also swing forward when the suspension droops and kind of arches, you know, and pulls that radius forward when it droops out. So that's that. The panel work starting here is going to be reminiscent of that same thing. So the, you know, this will kind of wrap around the bypass. It's compressed right now, so we know that the bypass is not going to go any more rearward. The only thing it'll do is swing in and swing out, and we can gauge that pretty easily just with a visual. So this panel work is going to kind of start here and wrap and go right behind the bypass. Obviously it's big, you know, we just need to do some final trimming on this thing, and then it's going to meet this panel right at that intersection. So you can kind of see the rudimentary marks on here for that. And that's just the very infancy stages of the tin package. But, you know, that was one of the things from the beginning is Eric's truck has a complete tin package included in it. So this thing will be a complete aluminum exterior enclosed chassis, not just the rear, but also the front and the engine bay. So things to look at here. Just the wraparound like we talked about, going in, you know, covering up everything towards where the bump stop and the plate work is here. And then the way to do this thing is to have it modular. So this ear here will come back and it'll pull through here, and then it's going to have to be a break in here just by the chassis. You know, the chassis kind of kicks out towards the rear, and then it comes in right where this kind of box area is. And then it straightens, you know, it has to have like a break because then it ties back into the chassis here. So I know this is a lot to digest and to get a visualized thing on. But this piece will come out, be an ear, Zeus buttons, and then there'll be an overlap. You know, I think this guy will probably actually be the one that's under, and this panel, the front panel, will overlap onto here. It's kind of just a layout. You can see the Zeus buttons in here, so everything is set up first. If I can pull it off where I can put all the Zeus buttons on first, I do that, and it makes the panel work go really fast. Sometimes you have to build the tin out first and then figure out where the Zeus buttons go, but you know, 90% of the time I will kind of know. I'll pre-run with a hard edge where the planes are. I'll pre-run all the surfaces and think about where the brakes are going to be, and think about where I need to put fasteners, where the fasteners or the hold downs will make the most sense. Also thinking about how can I use the minimal amount to still achieve the most tight, you know, loaded panel, where you're not going to have floppy corners or, you know, some kind of prevailing gaps towards the edges or whatever that would compromise the look. So, you know, spacing, layout, all a huge thing with the panel work. So we have floors, tin work, my knees, 1/8 inch footboards, 90 secondaries, 063 exterior tin, double layer for the exhaust near the B pillar, C pillar tube thing area, gas pedal, brake pedal, seat foundations, seat up and down, seat sliders. Things to talk about now. We kind of covered the rear chassis tin work. So that's definitely like I'm jonesing to finish that. That's my favorite stuff. That out of building everything, I enjoy sheet metal work and putting design into the bead roll aspect of it and everything more than anything else, period. I love that stuff. Shaping, just that, it's almost like you get to dress the vehicle with sheet metal work, and it's extremely satisfying. I think having crazy ADHD, and whatever else you want to call it that I have, that's a very quick turnaround, beautiful thing to see. So finish the rear tin work, both sides. Steering column, the one thing I did kind of mess up here is I took all the X and Y layout that Colin had with string here to really get a good center on the steering column. That's what's going on Colin's end right now. Making sparklers with the TIG welder. The cab on, so we want to get these two panels done that are the same as the passenger side, and then we kind of have goals here as far as Sand Sports Show. We're going to bring this to Sand Sports Show. It will be at Off-Road Expo as well. The date coming up sooner than that is Prerunner Paradise, TerraCrew Prerunner Paradise in Temecula, September 10th. Everybody is welcome to come. We will bring this and another vehicle. But as far as like deadlines, we're going to do as much as we can to get this thing very close to driving into Sand Sports Show. That doesn't mean that everything's going to be dialed. It just means that it's going to not be pushed. The other end of things, like the logistics with this stuff, is I have control over the things that are under the roof of this studio. I do not have control of a lot of the other things. So stuff like powder coat, stuff like wiring, blah, 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 is kind of only a handshake and a commitment away from my control. The one thing we can do is get all the accessories in the dash mounted, get the steering column kind of fit into there. Anything we need to do regarding the dash and the instrument panel there, I want to get done so we can send it out to get upholstered. We talked about doing door cards on the doors, the F-100 doors. Door cards meaning that it's not a panel that's dimensional, it's just a card. It's just a flat thing with some bead rolls and maybe a pole on it to close it, and put the manual door handles back in there, or window roller downer things. Upholster the door cards as well. These panels we talked about, these interior panels with the access panel for the shock servicing, I'm thinking about upholstering those too. So it would just be dash, door panel, and then this panel, and it would kind of be inclusive, like a horseshoe of upholstery. The seats are being made right now, all suede everything, with the logos in there and white stitching, so we'll match that on the door cards, we'll match that on the dash as well. Next steps, so on my end is that rear tin work. Getting the cab on here is the thing, and fixing the cab so it's bolted into its proper spots and brackets, so probably rockers somewhere on the C-pillar area, which is not a thing, but you know, somewhere where we can get, I would assume by the window, the whole rocker, the A-pillar, so upper A-pillar and lower A-pillar, all that stuff, so the cab sits and it's living there. Figure out what we're gonna do at the back window, start treating that. The bedsides themselves, I know this is a lot, but it's just, we'll get into it next time. The bedsides, Cody Campbell hit me up about bigger McQueen rear bedsides. So they do, I think it's a 6, correct me if I'm wrong, that's fine, but they offer something that's bigger than what we have, so we can avoid the dovetail thing and get something that's more fitting for the width of the rear axle. So probably hold up on mounting bedsides until the very last thing, just because we can't get those until the 4th or 5th. So we'll see where we're at with that. What we can do is we can move to the front. So that means we can compress the front suspension. We can start figuring out the fenders, the trim on the fenders, the hood, and the radiator, and the grille, and the bumper, and really start to lock down everything on the front. So I think that pretty much covers things. Again, if you want to see this thing soon, September 10th is the soonest you can come see it, and that'll be Temecula, Prerunner Paradise. I hope you guys have a good Monday. Like, comment, subscribe. Bye. Bye. Bye.